All right, are we ready to get started then? All right, let's go ahead and get started. Hi there, welcome to Transforming from Doing Agile to Being Agile. As I mentioned before, we have two of us here in the same room. So my name is George Demet. I'm the founder and CEO of Palantir.net, and
I'm Tiffany Ferris. I'm the CEO of Palantir as well.
yes, and so we are a digital consultancy. We are based near Chicago. We have team members spread across the United States, and we are actually celebrating our 25th year in business this year. And so this session is a little bit about a part of our journey that we've taken over the last few years as we've sort of grown and evolved as an organization. And so where I want to start is with the question of what is Agile, right? So many of you are probably familiar with, the Agile tools and practices, right? You do stand-ups, scrums, you have your tickets that you might use Jira, Trello, or some other tool like that. You have, story points and estimation. You can probably use some sort of continuous integration tool like Circle CI, Travis, Jenkins, etc. You may even, if you're, depending on your organization, you might use one of the large, one of the frameworks like SAFe or LESS, which are really designed for enterprise Agile. So that is one part, and I think that's the part that most folks who are, been working in software development, certainly in the last, 10 to 20 years, are most familiar with. But what's also interesting about Agile is that it's really all of those tools and practices are meant to serve a set of values and principles. And the values and principles are really things that come directly out of the Agile Manifesto, which was that, start of the Agile movement when a group of software engineers got together about 20 years ago for a retreat and kind of came up with these. We're kind of frustrated with the state of software development and really came up with these principles and values for how they wanted a better way to develop software. So when you put both of these things together, what you actually get is something called the Agile Mindset, right? And so it is, I'm seeing someone might be having some issues with audio and video. So if anyone else is having trouble with that, please, okay, looks like it may be an individual issue. Okay, thank you. So when you take those and you put it together, when you use, these frameworks, these tools, these techniques, these structures, and it's informed by the values and principles of Agile, you're engaging in what's called the Agile mindset, right? It's where you go from just doing the Agile things to actually thinking in a more Agile way. So there's Simon Powers, who runs a Agile training organization called Adventures of Agile, articulates this in the idea of what he calls the Agile Onion, right? So at the core of the Agile Onion, you have these tools and processes, practices, and then it builds up to the values, principles, and mindset. And you can use, almost any organization can use Agile tools and practices, but in order to really embrace those principles and values and that mindset, more change is required at an organizational level, right? So, so if your organization is run like a machine, right, Agile will only take you so far. And, what we found a few years ago, this is actually what happened to us, right? We had adopted Agile in our development processes, but we hadn't made the other changes at the organizational level that were necessary to truly unlock the power of Agile. Our team members were resourced to multiple projects at a time, which meant they had to do a lot of context shifting. There was a lot of management overhead required. And the end result, it was a negative impact on both productivity and team member morale. And you actually see this, this is a model by a man named Frederick Laloux, who presents the different models of different kinds of organizations. And he talks about what you can do within the different structural models. And so, he starts at the lower left. You have your organizations that are very focused around power, structure, authority, formal roles. If you think about like the military would be a good example. And then you will have achievement based organizations that are, really think about themselves in terms of, doing a lot of work, measuring things, going fast, rewarding people based on, merit, achievement, or, productivity, or some conception thereof. If you think about a lot of startup organizations exist in this achievement place. And then you have people-centered organizations, right? And so they still have a hierarchy, but they exist within a framework that is really focused around people. And I actually think that, a lot of organizations in the Drupal ecosystem are really very green organizations. But then he presents this idea of the teal organization. And the teal organization is one that, has moved from this idea of dependence and from independence to an idea of interdependence, right? So in a teal organization, it's more like an organism than where the different parts all work together to support the whole, right? And the reality is that a traditional hierarchy isn't well equipped to handle complex problems. Organizations that are successfully able to get to the teal stage are stronger, more stable, they have better results, and higher employee satisfaction than more traditional companies, right? So as we have gone through our journey, I think, we were at a point where we were very much kind of, in between kind of both that orange and green place. And, we made a decision to really try and push toward a more teal kind of organization. So, one of the ways you can do that is there's a movement called Modern Agile that really is focused on applying the Agile mindset to organizations. And they've identified a set of principles that can help an organization really embrace this. Of course, the focus on people, making people awesome, making safety a prerequisite. And that's really talking about psychological safety, a place where folks are able to speak up and raise questions and concerns without worrying about negative repercussions, where you're continually focused on delivering value, and where, of course, one of the core parts of Agile is experimenting, learning rapidly, and reintegrating those experiments and that learning into the organization. So that's a little bit of sort of the background and context. And now I'm going to turn it over to Tiffany to talk about how we have done this within our organization.
So if you decide that you're ready to make this shift from seeing your own organization as a machine to one that is more like a living organism, where do you start, right? It is a pretty big paradigm shift from one that recognizes that your organization is more than a collection of lines and boxes. Anytime you embark on an organizational redesign, it's more than just shifting around the Post-its on your big whiteboard. This move from a more traditional, more bureaucratic, hierarchical structure is a pretty significant one. And when we started, even though we were a relatively flat organization, we still did have those silos. We had, we had our UX team, we had our engineering team, we had our ops team, and and we had a management team above that, and then there was some George and I, and so that's pretty flat, but you still kind of had to make some pretty significant changes to evolve our mindset to one that was much more cross-functional, and to really shift the organization to being one where leadership is a construct where we provide direction and facilitate action around these kind of cross-functional teams that are organized around end-to-end accountability. That's a very big mindset shift. So acknowledging that when we started on this journey in 2018, we, didn't start out thinking that we were going to become agile. We just knew that we had for years tried to build out this management tier and it hadn't worked. Like, so we're sitting here, we're like, okay, what are we going to do? And how are we going to do it? And so we set out and we said, okay, well, we're going to start and we're going to sit down and we're going to redesign the company again. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to understand and then solve for the root problem. And we wanted to design something that would work for now and that would scale with us. And being a huge fan of martial arts films, like I am a big fan of Bruce Lee. And so I really like this quote, which I have no idea if it's apocryphal or not, but I do love it, which is adapt what is useful, reject what is useless, and add what is specifically our own. And it fits with us, it fits with open source, it fits with kind of our ethos, which is like, look, if something exists, let's use it. If it doesn't fit with us, let's not use that part, and let's really only add that secret sauce that is specifically Palantir's. Let's stop trying to rewrite everything and stop trying to invent everything on our own, because we are a small company, and let's really focus on those things. So when we sat down, we said, okay, what are the key questions that we need to solve with this redesign? And for us, it boiled down to three things, and these are pretty common to any kind of professional services company. The goals you have are, how do you do good work? How do you keep your team happy? And how do you do it sustainably? So for us, as we sat down to think about it, we wanted to know, how do we deliver repeatable value to our clients? And how can we be a human-centered company that wasn't dependent on or designed for any specific person or people? Perhaps, this would resonate with you if you ever have been in an organization, or perhaps are in an organization now that relies on individual heroics to be successful. And then how do we better support our team? So that's what we really kind of were focused on. And as we sat down to understand the root causes of what had, why we were in the situation we were at, what we realized is that our engagements were largely transactional, and they had this kind of asymmetrical understanding of the value that we were delivering, there was such an expectation disconnect, that there, whether we were collaborating or whether we were just engaging. And then also that there was internally this kind of inconsistent experience due to a lack of clarity in the roles that we had. We were definitely, doing Agile on our project teams, but, whether we were faithful to Agile was we were little a Agile, not big a Agile, if that means anything to you. So as we sat down to kind of think about how might we be different moving forward, we fairly quickly realized that on both a tactical and a strategic level, that embracing Agile would help us address all three of those questions. So we were able to simplify it down to one big question, which is, okay, how does Palantir become an Agile organization? And so to do this, we needed to adopt and adapt our strategy, our structure, our processes, our people, and to a lesser extent, even our technology, toward this kind of new operating model. And it would take a lot of mindset shifts while we were all still running this, pretty small business. So this is the story of how we've done it so far and where we are now, as well as what we see ahead. So as we started in 2018, it was in the second half of 2018, we kind of identified this North Star. So the latter half of 2018, we really said, okay, what are we looking to do? And we came up with three objectives. That what we needed to do is we needed to be disciplined in how we worked with each other, flexible in how we worked with our clients, and have everything be optimized for focus and flow. So those were the three big things that we were looking at doing. And what this did is it gave us this kind of sense of shared purpose. It gave us a mission and a vision that we could kind of organize around. And we used that, those three areas, as these big strategic signposts for where we were going, specifically this notion of focus and flow. As George talked about earlier, the context shifting was brutal. And this really became the rallying cry as we moved forward into 2019 to have our team really focused around haves and wholes. And our business ever since has really been organized around this notion of haves and wholes, half-time or full-time. And that's been pretty key for us. And we started at the end of 2018 working on the reframing of the mindsets. up until this point, even though, as George mentioned, we've been running the company for a really long time, we had not really been clear with ourselves or with others what kind of a firm we were. Were we a software firm? Were we an open source, software firm? Were we an agency? Were we a consultancy? And we were actually started to be very, very clear, both internally and externally, about what kind of firm we were. We are a digital consultancy. We do see ourselves that way, and provide this kind of clarity in how we deliver that end-to-end value in each of our service lines, in each of our value streams. So with that, we started to focus on that vision, and not just the vision of the work we do and the value that we deliver, but also this vision of the company. It wasn't about getting better at doing management. It was actually about embedding leadership at all levels, and that we wanted to pursue this notion of a mesh, of a networked organizational structure that embedded servant leadership from all of us, and where we could focus on delivering value and benefiting from greater agility. And so with that, we said, okay, now as we start to look at all of the different parts of our organization, what's this blueprint? How does the structure, how does the process, and how do the people, how might they need to start to evolve, and how would we go about doing that? And the interesting thing is we were totally wrong. We totally underestimated how long any of that would take. And we weren't yet agile. So I talk about this in the retrospective part of this talk. It was interesting to see, just how unagile we were going about trying to become agile. Mm-hmm. So I don't regret it. But I do wish that we had known what we know now. So the initial resistance, of course, was that, we're not a product company. How can we do this? Our teams aren't long lived enough, because, we do work on our projects length of, 4 to 9 months. How could we possibly do this? People are on, 2 projects sometimes at a time. Agile is designed for in-person teams, and we are a remote first company. And actually, since 2016, we've been pretty much everyone works remote. And oh my gosh, you want to do what with budgeting? So, ultimately we were able to overcome each of these resistances, right? So in terms of, not a product company, it requires coaching and buy-in from both the internal and the client teams. And, the fact that our teams aren't long lived enough, we focus on cultural coherence to overcome that. The fact that Agile isn't designed for in-person teams, I think all of us now, in the pandemic, understand how you deal with that. You think about the purpose and the objective of each of the ceremonies and consider how you meet those in a remote context. But we had decided, of course, that one of the most important Agile shifts was from authority to influence. And so what that meant is that even though we had decided, George and I were on board, yes, we're going to go in this agile direction, that at every step, every time we were making one of these shifts, we needed to reinforce those changes that we were making by role modeling. We needed to do skill building. We needed to make sure that we were explaining why what we were doing was important. We needed to build that understanding among the team. And we needed to reinforce it with making sure that there was policy alignment at every step. So then you move forward into 2019, which is where we really started to do the piloting and the embedding of the work. So on the structural front, we started to evolve the reporting structure into a support structure. So we created the people and organizational development units, which I'll talk about a little bit more about in a second. Comes out of this notion that you really don't report to a single person. There is no hierarchy. So what does that look like in a network structure? We created chapters for each discipline. So if you're familiar with a more matrix structure, that's what that looks like. And obviously the project teams became the building block for learning and development within Palantir. And we tried to pilot guilds, which were kind of self-organized, cross-functional groupings for a single interest. Those didn't last long because we're really small and we're working on stuff all the time. So that's a spoiler alert. But so what are these pods? So pods were one of the structures we were iterating on was the professional and organizational development team, or the pod. The idea was that every team member had a dedicated team who provide facilitation, collaboration, and coaching around an individual's performance, growth, and development goals. It included a representative from their chapter or discipline, someone who was thinking about their experience as a team member here at Palantir, as well as somebody who was thinking about the company, how they contribute to our success as an organization. And they have multiple lenses. So the pods meet both as a group and then one-on-one. The experienced team member meets with each person, roughly every 2 to 3 weeks. And then they meet as a group a couple times a quarter. And so we found that this kind of team approach helps promote very open and honest and meaningful discussions, because as team members know that their career path at the company isn't dependent on any single individual or manager. So then on the people side, one of the first things we did is we leveled salaries. We felt it was important that we had equal pay for equal responsibilities. So we have 16 different pay levels. You also can opt for increased PTO time if that's something you want. And then we also, this year, we implemented a new downshift for those who want to be able to just routinely be at 75% schedule, because you either have childcare responsibilities or elder care, or you just want more sunshine in your life. So that's a new thing. PTO is personal time off. Thank you. And then we had a role-based structure. So one of the things about Agile is that you don't, when you want to be able to take the role that is essential to you, but then that if you change your role, depending on what the needs of the project are, how do you define, in a non-hierarchical team, how do you define your career advancement? So that becomes something that we had to define as well in the process as part of it. And that comes up in our RBS rubric, which I'll talk a little bit about. And then we also had to support this with a considerable amount of training, both at the group and the individual level. Fortunately, we were able to provide get a lot of support from folks like Richard Kasparowski, Adventures with Agile, Michael Sahota. We brought in a lot of Agile partners here to help us. On the process side, we made the shift to half and whole time resourcing and billing. We did a shift from documentation over into playbooks. The difference here is that instead of saying this is how we do it, we started to talk about plays, like these are the questions you'll want to ask and answer for yourself as a team, since Agile teams control their way of working. When you're in this scenario, these are the kinds of questions that you'll want to ask yourself. And then practices become, this is a way that you might consider solving it. So there might be multiple practices that are appropriate in a given situation. We started to roll out a decision-making framework that talks about the different types of decisions that are made at Palantir and who gets to what level of decision is appropriate, because the person who is appropriate to make given decision is a person who is closest to the decision, who has both the context, a sense of the big picture, and an understanding of the day-to-day operations for it. So we talked about leaf level decisions, which are personal decisions, branch level decisions, which are team level decisions, trunk level decisions, which are decisions that impact multiple branches, multiple projects, and then root level decisions, which affect the company as a whole. And then we started to work on the RBS rubric. And so I can talk a little bit more about that when we talk about rolling that out. So then we hit 2020. So 2020 is obviously our pandemic year, but for the most part, we went into the year understanding that it was a year for us to iterate and improve. And as you start to think about that, we iterated on our pods. So you start with now. Anytime you iterate in an Agile organization, you start with now, you define an experiment, and you do some research, and then you test it and roll it back out. So we did that with the pods. Our initial rollout of the pod actually had 3 people. And then we realized that, that was just, we didn't actually have enough people to have 3 pod representatives for each person. We were all exhausted. We couldn't do justice to it in that kind of form. And so that's the way we actually reduced it down to 2 pod members per pod. And that's actually been fine.
Well, 3 pod members total, because you have
the team member.
Right. The team member is the 3rd person of the pod. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. So that actually worked out well. And then we were able to kind of iterate in on that. So then we also provided some more clarity around the pod, shifting more toward coaching and empowerment, less directing at that place. We started to roll out the career path developments and individual learning plans per person. And then the chapters started to become more self-managed. They reorganized a little bit. When we first seeded the chapters, we provided a suggestion of like what the chapter should be. And so then the chapters changed. They got together which chapter people were in. They got to choose which chapters they wanted to be in. They changed the topics around the chapters in that way. So, and then in terms of the structures in the process, the pods became more outcome focused and reduced to 2 members. The guilds were self-organized by interest, and the chapters were really around disciplines. So these are the discipline based. The guilds kind of dropped off because we just didn't have enough time in the day to do that.
Yeah. A lot of the topics the guilds were discussing, I think, ended up being integrated into the chapter conversations. So
yeah, or they became
just sort of
or people
separate.
use their prof dev time to do
Yeah.
work on them individually,
Yeah.
or as an internal project. So then we also were able to roll out our RBS Rubric pilot, and that tool started to roll out. So I've talked about that a little bit. So what happens is if you are in a matrixed organization and there is no hierarchy either in your project team or in your or based on the role that you're playing on a project, how do you define career advancement? And so what we did is we actually took our lead from education. So in education, Rubric is this kind of multi-dimensional set of scoring guidelines. It can be used to provide consistency in evaluating progress. So the idea is like, you don't have the same people in all these pods. We couldn't possibly do that. So there's a lot of different people, but we want to be able to provide a consistent experience around measuring progress because your level is tied to your salary, and we have a published salary schedule. So people want to know, how do I advance? How do I continue to add depth to my career? How do I continue to move forward? How do I get a raise? So the RBS structure and the RBS rubric is about that. And so what it does is it provides this kind of authentic, decentralized assessment that is employee driven and an employee driven career development, but also you're involved in that assessment process because team members are now taking an active role in their career advancement, in self-evaluation, and in goal setting. And so now there's a much stronger validity around that the self-assessment is, or that the assessment in general is both accurately measuring their learning and their progress. And then there's a lot more alignment between what each team member is interested in, and then also the way that the company can benefit from that. So as I mentioned, last year was the pandemic year. And one of the ways that I knew that, or I can measure that we've been being successful with this is that we rolled out what we called our code name Armadillo, which was our individual project for resolve and resilience as a company. So last year was a year where we really needed organizational agility, if ever. And so as a company, we committed to salary continuity, position preservation, and policy innovation. And so because our project teams have the clarity, the transparency, and the direction, as well as the autonomy to take care of each other and the clients, George and I were able to really focus on preserving the company, and we were fine. And in addition to that, we were able to run kind of experiments. We were able to do some flow to work so that early in February, I was able to assemble a team, which we called our C19 project, to prepare. I was worried about the pandemic coming in. And so I said, hey, can some people help me start to think through what this might mean for us? And they did. And then in the third quarter, I said, hey, let's do some scenario planning around this and see what we might want to be thinking about as we start to think about how we might emerge from this. And some folks came and we did some cool scenario planning around it. So we were still able to kind of build up our stamina as an organization. But we did that because we were able to say, you know what, we're just going to slow it down. We know that this year we're not really going to do sales and marketing. Nobody's going to do sales and marketing. We are going to protect and preserve the clients that we have and the team members that we have. So we're not going to do any recruiting. We are not going to do any onboarding. We're not going to do much sales, or we're not going to do much marketing. We are just going to take care of the clients and the people that we have. And so that was why we called it Codename Armadillo. So this year is all about our backbone transformation. So this is where what needs to happen before we start to scale. So we need to be focused on rewiring the systems organizationally to support that agility that we've discovered and to build the capabilities required to sustain that organizational agility. Otherwise, you're going to burn out and burn out people and burn out the company by going so fast. So where we are now is we have cross-functional delivery teams that focus on serving our clients. We have self-managed teams for those kind of baseload activities like sales and marketing, or like thinking about our service lines. And then we have flow to work pools. So you may be familiar with our Rector work last year. That was a flow to work pool because we had some availability and they were able to work on that. Or, or even the RBS Rubric ambassadors, as we've been rolling that out. That's a flow to work pool as well, just a need that has kind of come up. So what's next for us? We'll do some more blueprinting, although this time it'll be a more participatory process. People had inputs into it last time, but I expect it to be a more voices actually in the room doing the blueprinting. We'll be democratizing our decision-making and the information necessary to participate in more of those decisions, more types of decisions. We'll be investing in our capacity building around, especially around coaching, because that's a big thing you need to invest in. And then maturing all those kind of core processes. We call them our trunk processes. And then we're doing high-level road mapping as well. So in terms of retrospective, what we've liked, mindset shifts around the shift from management to leadership, scarcity to abundance, that's been really helpful. Having the right partner is very important in terms of what we learned. People over process is really hard when people are busy. So we've been doing this while we've been doing all the other things. There is certainly an ongoing tension between local autonomy of teams, so teams controlling their way of working, but then also having the necessary big picture strategic view. So there's just an inherent tension when you move toward organizational agility in those two areas, and I don't have a good way of resolving that yet. What we've lacked is rollout support. Communication is always going to be a challenge. It's hard to make change smaller and more incremental when you're moving toward organizational agility. And agile planning, when you've never done it or seen it, can be hard. And what we've longed for, I wish I started earlier, visibility of system status, especially in a fully remote context, is hard. Knowing what experiments are in progress can be hard. The balance between the balcony and the dance floor views, between the strategic and the tactical, is what that means. Having role models, people who have done this, communities of practice at the organizational level, particularly at our size, is something that I really would love to do more of, which is why I've done this talk. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts. We're going to head over to our booth. If anybody has any Q&A, please join us over there. Hope you've enjoyed the talk. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone who came. Yeah. So I think we can just bounce over to the booth and we'll see folks there.
Yep.
All righty. We're heading out. All righty. See you in a few. Bye-bye.